Akram here, and in this tutorial I'm going to share with you how to set up your model when you want to create animated materials for certain parts of the actual physical model. And a perfect example of that is with our sweetie heart here. She is a very basic model made up of a couple of geospheres and a little heart. We want to include an animation for Sweetie where her eyes blink and her mouth might move, things like that. And because she is such a simple model, we can do this really easily with animated materials. We'll just use a material applied to her and then animate that material. We can animate the material inside of 3D Studio Max, or in our case, we'll be using Unity, our game engine, to animate her facial expressions. But before we can get to making those materials and setting up the animation, we need to set up the mesh itself. Now, depending on the size of your model, the areas that we're going to be animating, say the eyes and the mouth, they may actually be really small in comparison to the entire texture of the mesh. So in order for us to get a high resolution texture on just the areas that we want for the eyes and the mouth, we're going to need to separate those meshes out. And it's a really simple setup. To set this up, it's really basic. I am going to select my sweetie body, which is the main geosphere, and go to the Modify tab over here. Now, as I said before, Sweetie is made up of geospheres, and geospheres give us nice triangles to work with, and allowing us for a little bit more control versus a standard sphere in 3ds Max. Now, after making the geosphere, the surfaces on the geosphere are not identical on the round of the sphere. So in order to get the same shape for the eyes on both sides, I needed to have my sphere symmetrical. So if I hide some of these modifiers, you can see that after creating the geosphere, I've added an editable poly where I took half of the geosphere and basically deleted it. Then I added a symmetry tool that now makes the faces on the opposite side symmetrical to the faces on the right side here. Now, in order to select any of these faces, I need to add another editable poly. So what we want to do is we want to select now the areas for the eyes and the area for the mouth so that we have a specific area that we can apply our high-res textures for those items. To do this, I'm going to select my editable poly, and I'm simply going to go down to the polygon selection, and I'm going to pan up in this dialog, and I'm going to make sure that ignore back facing is also turned on. And this just ensures that I'm not selecting anything in the background. I'm only selecting the surfaces in the foreground. So with that, I'm going to go into my front view, and I'm actually going to maximize the front view and select by holding the Control key and selecting all the surfaces I want for the eye. And I'm going to come over here and select the same surfaces on the other side. So now I have both surfaces for Sweetie. Now that I have the polygons for the eyes selected, I'm going to go ahead and maximize the perspective view so I can get a better view of her. And I'm going to go into the Move tool by pressing W here. And I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and in the Y-axis here, I'm just ever so slightly going to move that mesh out from where they are. And this is going to bring up a dialog that tells me I am creating a clone of this mesh. Now it's asking me whether I want to clone this to the same element, meaning that they're just more surfaces as part of the original element, or if they are their own object. And I actually want to make these their own object. And I'm going to call these eyes. and I'm going to press OK. Now, it's going to be kind of hard to see them because they are the same color, but over in my hierarchy over here, you can see that I now have an element called eyes. And I'm just going to, for the sake of this example, change the color of these to black. And here you can see that I now have the shape for the eyes. Now, this is not necessarily the shape of the eye. These are all the surfaces that we're going to work within to create the material for the eyes. Now that I've done the eyes, I'm going to do the same thing for the mouth. So I'm going to go over, I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to go into the front view and maximize. And again, I'm going to select my sweetie head here. And I am going to go back into polygon mode and select an area for the mouth surfaces. I'm going to hold down Control key to select multiple surfaces. And that looks good. So I'm going to minimize this, move back into my perspective view. I'm going to hit the W to get the move tool up, and with the shift key selected, I'm going to ever so slightly move against the Y axis. And again, it's going to ask me how do I want to clone this, and I want to create a new object. I'm going to call it mouth and press OK. Again, you're not going to see much because it's the same color as the rest of Sweetie. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to my hierarchy, find the mouth, and just for the sake of this example, I'm going to go ahead and change her color to black so that we can see her. And I'm going to go back to zoom extents. Actually, I want the main body here, zoom extents all. And she looks pretty kind of creepy at the moment. But what we want to do is we want to create these meshes so that we can apply materials to areas within those meshes. Now that we have our object set up, our main body, we can go ahead at this point, collapse. And I'm actually going to do a file save as. And again, you want to be saving in increments. So I'm going to save this one as Sweetie number 12. And this just allows me to keep backups if I ever need to go back in time to a specific point to Sweetie. But what I want to do is I want to go ahead and collapse the main body. So in the hierarchy, I've got the main body selected. So in the Modify tab over here, I'm simply going to come over here, right click, and choose Collapse All. And it's going to bring up this dialog box. I'm going to hit yes, and it collapses that to an editable poly. This reduces some of the information in the file and also makes it easier to export into Unity. And again, if you are working with geospheres, all of your geospheres need it to be collapsed to an editable poly or an editable mesh before exporting for Unity. Now that we have that done, we need to set up the eyes and the mouth with a UV Unwrap so that we have a template as to how we want to make the materials essentially for the eyes and mouth. So I'm going to come over to my hierarchy. I'm going to select the eyes, and from here I'm going to go over to my Modify tab, and I'm going to add a UV Unwrap. And what this does is it's going to allow us to create a template for our texture. So I'm going to go into the settings here to say Open UV Editor. And we are going to see a outline of the eye. Now, the two outlines are actually right on top of each other at the moment, but if I come over to the explode settings, I can flatten the spacing of the outlines. So I'm going to do that, and this immediately moves the two outlines separate. Now I need to kind of get a better sense of where this image is angled. So I'm going to click on my surfaces here, and I'm seeing that this is the bottom of the right eye. And if I click here, this is the bottom of the left eye. So I'm going to need to rotate these. So I'll start here and I'll rotate this one like so. And move it off screen so I can work on this one. And this is definitely the top here, so I'm going to select that one, and I'm going to rotate this one. I'm going to use the move tool to move it into place and move this one into place. You might have to do a little bit of finagling here to get them both in the view. I might have to rotate this one a little bit.
Rotate this one. You might even, depending on how big they come out, you might need to scale them ever so slightly to scale them a little bit. Again, we want to try to keep these as large as we can so that the textures come out fairly large. So I'm going to come out. Of course, our material is pretty simple. It's not going to be anything fancy. And I'll move this one over a little more. And again, I think I need to scale them.
Once you have the UV template set up to your liking, you're going to go up to Tools and Render UV Template. This will open up this dialog here. We're going to hit Render Template. It's going to open this dialog, which is actually going to come in as a transparent PNG when we save it. So we're going to go up to Save. And we want to save this image to our project folder. We can save it in a couple of different places. I like to save it into the Scene Assets folder. And in the Scene Assets folder, I've created a folder called UVW so that I can put all my UVW templates. So I'm just going to double click on that. I'm going to save this as UVW UVW-sweetie-eyes. And the format that we're going to save this as is, in fact, PNG. And we'll do Save. And press OK. And then we can close this dialog, and we can close this dialog, and this dialog. And you will repeat this process for your mouth. In our image editor is where we would import our UVW template and use that as sort of a base to where we want to create the textures. And again, in this example, it's a very simple, we just want to create a couple of oval eyes. And I just needed a sense of where the spacing for those shapes are. Because even though, as you can see here, and I know it's kind of hard to see, but if I zoom in, we have these angular meshes, but we want the eyes to be oval. And all I have done in here, and I'm using Krita for this, is I have created a couple of layers with some oval eyes, and you can see how they set on the template. And if I turn off these layers, you can see that I actually have layers for the eyes closed too, and I kind of placed them again where I saw that they would look best on these meshes. Now once I'm ready, I'm simply going to turn off the template layer, save out the closed eyes as a PNG, turn off the closed eyes, turn on the opened eyes, and save those as a PNG. And now that we have our eyes materials done, we would return to Max and do the same process of adding a UVW unwrap on the mouse mesh, and then exporting out a template to create the textures for the mouse material. Once all our materials are set up, we will create the animation for these materials using Unity, but that is for another tutorial. I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and don't forget to check out our other tutorials on the channel. What are you waiting for? Get creative today!